So welcome back to Third Age Reforged into another battle replay, and this is going to be another RP battle actually. This one is the large one that is running on the official Discord, and this is going to be another siege as well, and I can only assume that no one has really had time to upgrade their towns in the official RP, because we've seen this settlement a lot in terms of the sieges that I have personally shown from the RP. I think only one that I've received has actually been on a different settlement to this. But regardless, we will be seeing obviously unified factions once again facing off against one another. We will have the goblins from the Misty Mountains on the defence once again actually. So this one was sent to be by rules again, and the last time we saw a battle from him, of course, it was on the Iron Hills and the goblins were fighting off against a very superior elven foe. And that may very well prove to be the case in this battle as well, although I think the Misty Mountains have got a much better chance in this battle, of course, because I don't think they're going to be quite so outgunned. They do have the defensive position after all. The settlement, under normal circumstances, I would say this is a pretty hard settlement to defend, but with the numbers that the goblins have, generally in their units, they should be able to cover most angles, and seeing as it is the elves on the attack, the elves do need to be a little bit careful that they don't lose too much of their manpower to stuff like the arrow towers and, of course, the defensive skirmishes that the Misty Mountains can bring, like the Snaga skirmishes and the heavy goblin crossbows. But more on that later, because the Elven force, or the Elven forces, all four armies, are going to be made up of the realm of Mirkwood, and actually Starling is the one who is... This is going to be from Starling's perspective. Now I remember, yeah, Starling is the one that sent me the replay, but Rules is the one who told him to send me the replay. But regardless, we will have four armies of Mirkwood converging on this settlement. Again, the elves will need to approach this somewhat differently to how the orcs would normally approach a settlement. Obviously the orcs can just sort of throw themselves forward, and generally speaking they can absorb quite a lot of casualties. The elves cannot do that because their units are smaller, but as soon as they do engage, of course, they are going to be able to rip their way through heavy goblins relatively easily. Mirkwood, of course, with some very nice melee defense. And to be fair, we may as well start with the army compositions for the attackers, because obviously we can go through the defences later. So the blue team, the attackers, we have Mirkwood, of course. Starling has got a catapult on the front, which is going to be necessary. I would personally use them to bring down the arrow towers, because you're going to need to preserve as much of your manpower as you possibly can. And we have several units of Here E Alth on the front line as well, which also is a good choice, because again, sort of more elite elven line infantry like this is something that the orcs really struggle with sort of going one-to-one against. They really have very few options which will trade efficiently with them. Even, well, the best thing probably that the Misty Mountains would think to throw into battle against a unit like this would probably be the Blackback Mountain, well, not the Blackback Mountain Berserkers, sorry, the Black Uruks of the mountains, but even they would not be particularly good against elven units like this. And in the back we also have some Here E Ek, so again the heavy elven spears. For the most part their melee skill will allow them to also trade very nicely with most infantry, especially lower tier goblins. They're not going to have a problem with doing that either. Just in case there's any wargs in the settlement that might sally out as well, this can be a good unit to try and defend against any charges that they try and make. A couple of units of Thandramierin as well, similar sort of purpose behind these guys, except they aren't as strong as the Hiriak, of course, but they are cheaper, and you can't just bring, well, I suppose you can try and bring just elite units as Mirkwood, but it gets very, very expensive very, very quickly. Moving down the line, we have some javelins over here. So we do have the Maethir Lasgellen, which of course spear javelin hybrids. They will be a very good unit in 0.97 because of the buffs to spears. They will be excellent at zoning out enemy cavalry. For the time being though, they're a little bit underwhelming in melee for what they cost, but the javelins are the main attraction, and they are still capable of dishing out a lot of damage with them. We've also got a couple of units of Thurney Tower, the main line archer for Mirkwood. Really, they work a little bit differently than most other sort of main archers that factions bring, because of course they can hide, which means they can avoid a skirmish fight completely, and obviously they do have that elven accuracy and the slightly higher damage than most other factions' normal archers as well. And then, of course, the Delupeng, Em and Dwyer. When you're in a siege battle like this, it really pays to bring a unit of rangers if your faction has access to them, because they can get ludicrous amounts of kills if they get into just the right area. A little bit of a risk behind bringing them is that, you know, the enemy will try to focus them down as soon as they see them if they are able. So oftentimes it's quite a good idea to sort of leave your rangers back a little bit further to sort of wait for the opportune moment to strike with them. And the Delupeng are one of, if not the joint strongest rangers in the game, purely because they are Elven rangers, which does mean instead of the 5 missile damage they do have the 6, which means 6 missile damage plus the body piercing makes them very, very effective indeed. I believe the Wardens of Elos Tyrion and the Wardens of Minas Ithil are the only other ones to have that distinction, and the Wardens of Minas Ithil have less men in the unit, so the Delupeng and the Wardens of Elos Tyrion are stronger in terms of a DPS perspective. The Aradirith Amon Lank, which are another unit that I really enjoy because they can hide, which is very nice of course, but also in melee they pull out that two-handed axe. And the Elven factions, with the exception of Lothlorien, do actually have a little bit of a deficit in terms of their armour piercing units in melee. So having a unit like this, sort of multi-purpose, both a lot of damage at range and then getting into melee and laying out a hurt on some heavily armoured units, because they of course too have some very nice defensive skill, which is quite rare for a big two-handed axe unit. They can be a very good unit, very nice hybrid unit indeed. Over here, the General's Bodyguard unit, you can see Thranduil over here holding his swords the wrong way. We have the Aragwe y Nanwaith, which are overall, you know, units like this in 0.96 can be a little bit difficult to use efficiently. The very high tier archers, because they simply don't have enough men in the unit, and overall cheap archers are very, very efficient in 0.96.1. In 0.97, I would hope that more expensive archers along these sorts of lines become a little bit more viable, because the idea behind a unit like this is, of course, you have terrific damage at range, and then when you get into melee, you have essentially a General's Bodyguard unit in melee, which the Aragwe Nanwaith do fill that role now. But I just feel as though it's a little bit too easy to counteract archer units like this in 0.96.1. But from what I've seen at 0.97, that will cease to be too much of a problem in 0.97. Then we have the Arthalion y Nanwaith, which overall with their two-ended glaive, they are arguably the most diverse sort of General's Bodyguard unit in terms of the damage they can deal, in terms of their defensive skill, the fact that they have a huge anti-cavalry bonus. There's very, very few units that will want to go one-to-one with the Arthalion y Nanwaith. They will be renamed, of course, to the Palace Guard in 0.97 again. Yeah, a very, very strong unit. I mean, if I were to pick just one unit to try and go into a situation where I didn't know what the enemy was, it might very well be the Arthalion y Nanwaith, because they can handle pretty much anything that is thrown at them. There are a few exceptions, of course. Nazgul will beat them one-to-one, because the Nazgul, of course, have very, very high stats, but they are also very expensive and quite easy to focus down. Yeah, the Arthalion y Nanwaith, definitely one of the strongest singular infantry units in the game. So now we'll go through the next Mirkwood armies, I think, a little bit more quickly, because I would imagine they're probably going to have similar armies. We do have some siege towers and a ram over on this side where Orange Phaedon's army is, and we have a couple of units of Therny Tower at the front of the stakes. We also have some Megiel y Erin, which is a bit of a difference. So of course they are cheaper than the Hira y Alth, but they are obviously not as effective, but they will certainly suffice against the basic heavy goblin units that will undoubtedly be arrayed against them. Obviously, basic elven line infantry like this in a similar vein to the Eldar Makar, the Harlingen infantry, and soon to be as well the Lothlorien swords, which are going to be added in 0.97 instead of the Lothlorien blades. They are a very good unit for dealing with that sort of thing. It's very, very easy to get an effective trade going with the elven units of this type. We also have some Hiriak in the back, of course, we've already seen them. Maith Ilaz Gellan and some Thandrum y Erin also. There's 3 more rams just parked up over here, a couple of Hiriat as well, so it seems to be a more infantry focused army over here. Some Delupeng, some more Maith Ilaz Gellan, some more Thandrum y Erin. Also got a catapult over here, and he too has the Aragwe y Nanwaith and the Arthalion y Nanwaith. So, we now move on to the southernmost army, and actually we have Isengard, so this is not interesting alliance that we've got going on here. So we have Isengard coming to the aid of Thranduil, so Saruman, I suppose, had a change of heart in this IP, in this RP I should say, and he's going to try and help the Mirkwood wipe the goblins from the face of this mountainside settlement. So he's got a couple of black powder cards. In fact, I think, based on what he's told me, indeed he does. He's got 4 black powder cards. Now, the black powder cards, needless to say, they are very distinct in what they are designed for, so I would imagine that we're going to see the black powder cards sort of just move forward and blast several holes in the wall, which will be very useful for the attackers, particularly on this side of the settlement, because it will force the goblins to try and cover every angle, and of course if they get stuck in 1v1 fights, they're going to trade very poorly, especially with the elves. But the black powder cards are also very expensive, as are having 2 Isengard ballistas, so Isengard definitely bringing the siege equipment here, so the walls are certainly not safe for the goblins to be on down here, but he has paid for that obviously in his army selection, because he has got really Dunlending clansmen making up a large portion of his army. He also has the Lurtz hunting pack, which of course are rangers, very good in melee as well. He has the Uruk-hai berserkers with the armour upgrade. They should do very nicely against a lot of the Misty Mountains forces. He's got some Nazkai, he's got a couple of units of crossbows, and he's got some champions of the White Hand. So really, with the exception of the guards of Orthanc, what Rules has done is taken basically every higher tier unit, well, and the trolls of the White Hand, every higher tier unit that Isengard has, and then just sort of padded out what he has left with the Dunlending clansmen. So Isengard definitely a supporting army here. And then finally, we have the third and final Mirkwood army, played by Mekdi, who has got several units of Hiri Alth. He also has some Thandrum y Erin over here. He too has got 2 catapults actually, so a lot of siege equipment here on this map. So I can imagine the arrow towers are going to be brought down very quickly and several holes knocked in the wall. Megil Erin, 4 units of them. He also has some 30 tower hidden back here. He also has some Delupe, some 30 tower back there as well. More Maithit Elasgallan and another unit of javelins as well. So now we shall move into the settlement, and Misty Mountain's probably feeling a little bit cramped in here with the numbers that their units normally bring. But no worries about that. The walls will soon be brought down, I'm sure. And first we have Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud. So we're just going to be sort of moving through these armies, and obviously we're just going to be sort of mixing all the players together, because undoubtedly that's what they've done with their armies. He's got some Goblin infantry up on the walls. Needless to say, they will be moved off pretty quickly because these walls are undoubtedly going to be brought down. A large mass of units down here. Enkspitz is also one of the defenders. He has got some of his units down here, including more Goblin infantry. Those Goblin infantry up there have got an armour upgrade, I think, actually. Nice. We also have some Mountain Orc Berserkers. We have, I think those are Heavy Goblin Halberds in there. More Heavy Goblin Spears as well, which needless to say are going to be a very important part of their defence with the mass that they can bring, holding the elves in place. Eclipse's General back there in the Goblin King Bodyguard. Some Heavy Goblin Halberds as well. More Mountain Orc Berserkers. It's a lot of AP that we've seen so far. Not necessarily very useful against Mirkwood or against Isengard, really, with how little infantry they've brought, but still, the Misty Mountains don't have much of a choice. They've got so much AP, they can hardly bring none of it. The Snaga Skirmishers and the Heavy Goblin Crossbows, just like in the fight on the Iron Hills a few days ago, I feel as though this is going to be the Misty Mountains' main hope of winning this fight. In terms of pure melee, Mirkwood easily will be able to roll over goblins like this. Heavy Goblin Spears, Snow Trolls, Heavy Goblin Infantry, of course, the backbone of any good cannon fodder Misty Mountains army. But in this case, they are going to have to throw themselves in front of the Elven advance and die in droves for the cause. So we have some Snaga Skirmishers back here as well. Tundra's Fox with some Mountain Orc Berserkers, so he is the third and final Misty Mountains player. Blackback Berserkers, certainly capable of laying out a hurt on just about anything, but something like the Athalion Inanways should still be able to kill them off. Excuse me. Some Snaga Skirmishers as well. More Berserkers, more Crossbows, so you can sort of see which way the wind is blowing here. Some Heavy Goblin Archers as well. Good to see some Archers at the very least, otherwise Mirkwood could just very easily sort of poke and prod them from a distance. Goblin Archers down there as well, Heavy Goblin Infantry, Mountain Orc Berserkers, more Heavy Goblin units, tons of Heavy Goblins all throughout the settlement. White Uruk Fearmongers as well. Very good actually, because the Isengard forces have not brought any pikes, and Mirkwood do not have access to any pikes at all. So the White Uruk Fearmongers do not have to worry about getting into a fight where they will be outranged. They get their halberds down and they could be able to hold the elves at bay. But obviously, you know, that only maintains if their phalanx can maintain its formation. Goblin King's Bodyguard from Enkspitz, as well as some Blackback Berserkers. He also has a catapult here defensively near the town centre. We also have some Goblin Archers up on the walls, and that's going to be just about it. Obviously, I'm undoubtedly going to miss a few things from the Misty Mountains units. Excuse me again. So some Black Uruks, the mountains down here as well. Good to see them at least. They can at least try and stand up to the Elven advance. More crossbows and javelins. Some White Uruk Fearmongers down here. Some Blackback Berserkers, some Troll Drummers as well. Cave Troll Drummers, Goblin Infantry, and some Heavy Goblin Archers. So, without further ado, let's begin. I have been fiddling around with Reshade once again. So hopefully we have... This is a little bit better. There is no blur anymore, which I agree was a little bit off-putting. So we should be in a good place with regards to that. So, let's see what Rules does. He is reforming with his black powder cards. Now this will actually save an awful lot of ammunition on his ballistae if he is able to sort of use his black powder cards to poke holes in the walls. But, I mean, I am interested to see how they approach this, because it's not as if Isengard can be the fodder army, because they simply haven't brought enough infantry. So they won't be the ones to move in first. But Mirkwood also, perhaps not the most well-positioned force to simply charge forward towards the walls. They are going to have to sort of take their time a little bit more and try and poke away at these defences. They managed to get some grazing hits on those Heavy Goblin Spears, but I do believe that Orange Phaedon's true target is to bring down a section of the wall, which will of course inflict pretty hefty casualties on the goblins that are up here anyway. They need to get off here quickly. One of the things about Medieval 2 which is quite annoying is when the wall is hit when a unit is on it, the unit will sort of forget what you told them to do, so you have to continuously click off the walls with your units, otherwise every time a cannon shot or a catapult shot hits the wall, they will stop moving, which is incredibly frustrating sometimes, especially seeing as the amount of damage a catapult can do to a unit which is stuck up on the walls like this. And Heavy Goblin Spears are an important part of a Misty Mountains defence. They do need to get down from here. They can't afford to be wasted too recklessly. but Eclipse is going to be able to get them down here. And yeah, so he's going to be force pathing them off, which is good to see. Let's go and see what's happening down here. The chanting of all the Berserker units. We can see that the Black Powder Cart is coming forward. I believe the Black Powder Cart crew is not like a standard artillery crew. I believe they are actually Uruk-hai Berserkers, which does make them somewhat more resilient, which is probably a good thing. Otherwise, you know, arrow towers and goblin archers up on the walls should be able to would be able to kill off the crew pretty quickly. You can see here that the arrow towers now coming in. Orange Phaedon has got what he wanted, I believe. Or has he? What was that? Nope, that was Rules at the back. Well, Starling, I should say. Rules is Isengard. Gotta remember. This sort of cough that I've had has lasted for about a month now. Meanwhile, and it's good to see that Starling is also going to be taking out the towers, because obviously they can pose a bit of a threat to Mirkwood with their lower unit counts overall, like I said. But if you take away the Misty Mountain's ability to sort of wear down your unit numbers as the elves, you should be fine. In melee, you know, the elves are never going to be too concerned with the goblins unless they get surrounded, but with how bottled up the goblins are by their own settlement, the elves find themselves in a pretty good position there. Meanwhile, I'm interested to see these Black Powder Carts. Obviously at the moment their texture is not fully implemented, but the Black Powder Cart is going to be coming forward. And this should be an instant kill on the wall, which again, should... It has a big blast radius as well, so they might want to be a bit careful of these goblin infantry, because the blast radius, I think, will actually catch all of these goblin units in it. Which Isengard may very well need, actually. Isengard, after all, you know, the goblins have probably got more men on the field despite only being a 3, because Isengard haven't brought much infantry at all because of all their siege equipment. DI wants to be careful as well, because he doesn't want to get caught up in the blast radius of the Isengard Black Powder. Go on, use the Black Powder. Look at these guys. I really want the Black Powder to go off. If he uses it on this wall as well, he will certainly catch some of these heavy goblin infantrymen in the blast radius as well, which again is going to be important, because Isengard is simply not going to be able to get as many kills as the Mirkwood armies unless they get their crossbows into a particularly advantageous position. Trying to go after the Mirkwood catapults there. Engsmith's with his own catapult. But he's not really hitting anything other than the siege towers at the moment. He could actually destroy the siege towers. I mean, it's already up to 40 damage. Here we go. Black Powder. Let's go. I think they're just sort of following these goblin archers along the walls, but if that's the case, I can't count that forever. So we're just going to be leaving them to their own devices for the time being and taking a look at what's happening around the other sections of the battlefield. Now, interestingly enough, you can see that some of the towers have fallen in the background over there. Orange Phaedon has not finished off these walls thus far. There is a fire raging in some of the buildings within the settlement. But he's only damaged the walls so far, so he's not too eager to actually enter the settlement just yet. And I do think he does need to save some of his ammunition so he can take out some of these arrow towers as well. He is a Mirkwood army after all, and their overall lack of armour can be a bit of a problem when dealing with ranged attacks, and the arrow towers over a long period of time can certainly make a pretty big difference. See over here as well, the Starling is going to actually open up another hole in the wall. There's only goblin infantry that are waiting in behind it. There are still some goblin archers up on the walls, and they are in range as well of something. Although I don't think that volley actually came to anything. The arrows were not loosed. And there goes the Black Powder Cart at long last. So let's go and see the fruits of Rules' labour. And you can see that just in behind there, caught in the blast radius, were some of the heavy goblin infantry. Up on the walls, however, they were actually fine. The goblin archers were not affected by that, and they are now shooting away at the Isengard ballista of all things. However, you can see here that the wall, it immediately takes 100 damage. And so that is another way into the settlement that the attackers have, or potentially out of the settlement that the orcs of the Misty Mountains have. The Misty Mountains may want to counter-attack some extent. Several of these walls are coming down at this point. You can see over here, there are heavy goblin halberdiers moving in, getting ready to make sure they can't simply pour in. There is another black powder cart over here. Do they have a second charge in the black powder cart? I always thought it was one and done, but apparently not. Meanwhile, those goblin archers are really doing a number on these catapult crews. So there's 2 catapults and a ballista down here which they have to fire into. They should definitely target one at a time. It does look as though they're going to try and kill off this catapult first of all. And all of this. Yeah, DI's definitely doing the right thing here by going after the arrow towers, I think. It's a huge amount of focused fire there down on that tower. But you can also see over here that I think it was, yep, it was over here, it was this one. So this wall will now crumble. They also killed off a few unit models in behind here as well, so the blast radius of the black powder cart coming good there. And that will be another hole in the wall, of course. Now again, down here Isengard doesn't have too much infantry to take advantage of any gaps they make. I'm not sure what they're trying to do here. But they are just walking through the pile of rubble that they've created. And now I don't believe you can use the black powder cart in melee with other infantry units. But the crew is now in combat with some goblin infantry, and I think they're just going to be overwhelmed here. There's a lot of goblins waiting for them. And over here, you can actually see that the black powder cart that was about to, I think, make another hole in the wall, a unit of goblin infantry is going to chase off the black powder cart. However, that is a really, really lethal shot there from the Isengard ballista. There's a lot of catapult shots going in there as well. That was a lot of artillery that they just dumped into trying to hit one unit of goblin infantry. Like, you have to question the actual long-term usefulness of the goblin infantry in comparison to your artillery ammo, I think. Meanwhile, the black powder cart is just being overwhelmed on all sides by these filthy goblins. And again, I think they are berserkers in melee. It's kind of hard to tell because the artillery crew are not good in melee. They are, you know, sort of standard artillery crews like the ones out here are the worst units in melee in the entire game. But I believe the black powder cart is somewhat different to sort of make them a little bit more viable. Meanwhile, we do actually have the potential threat here of Orange Phaedon moving in and claiming the settlement a little bit. Apologies for that. But the battering ram has just managed to open up another way into the settlement, which this is all well and good. But eventually, of course, the Mirkwood-Isengard alliance is going to need to come forward in force and start attacking this defensive position. And the Misty Mountains will be hoping that their numbers can simply wear down Mirkwood, and the fact that their ranged powers, hopefully with their crossbows and their javelins, they will be relying upon. But over here we can see that already we're going to have the beginnings of the assault on the town centre, it seems even. Starling coming forward with some units of Here Elves. And there are some snow trolls coming over to try and help out the goblins, fight them back. Goblin infantry and the heavy goblin infantry are over here in numbers, but it is really the snow trolls that are doing the damage to the Here Elves. And the Here Elves has actually taken a fair amount of damage, but also the Snaga skirmishers must be a big part of that. Because goblin infantry and heavy goblin infantry in melee is simply going to be no match at all for standard units of Here Elves. Once again, I apologise. The phone keeps going off at most inopportune moments. But regardless, we can see that some more of these snow trolls are starting to fall away now. You can see in the background the Thandrum, Erin loitering with intent to come in and reinforce. Starling is being quite aggressive here, which I do actually approve of. However, I do feel as though if he was going to do this, he would certainly have needed the support on all other fronts from his allies. Because I feel as though both DI and Rules were thinking of sort of a slower approach, trying to sort of poke and prod with the black powder carts and maybe using some range. Orange Phaedon is starting to move now. But Starling definitely the one taking a huge bulk of the casualties here. Now you can see the defensive catapult from the Misty Mountains not actually using flaming shot, which I'm quite surprised about really. This unit of heavy goblin infantry over here. Once again, the Snaga have got to be responsible for ensuring the victory of these heavy goblin infantrymen in melee, because there's no way that heavy goblin infantry would stand a chance against Here Elves otherwise. There is also the Maitha Ilazgalen in the background over here, as if to reinforce. The Here Ek are over here, the Here Elves also fairly depleted at this point actually. The unit is a bit strung out, But you can see here the Mountain Orc Berserkers are coming over here to sort of block their advance. The Blackback Berserkers are in close proximity as well, so this is certainly going to be the end of the Hiri Alth. Several units of Snaga skirmishers. Yeah, I think Starling has sort of walked into the lion's den willingly, really. I don't think his army was in a position to push forward this aggressively when the Misty Mountains were this prepared for an advance. But we'll see. I mean, Orange Phaedon could certainly come to the rescue if he decides to move in quickly. And he is starting to push in some units. He's got some Megil Yeren getting up close and personal with some heavy goblin units, which is exactly where Mirkwood forces like this would want to be. However, the arrow towers over here are still very much online. And that could prove to be a problem in the long run for Orange Phaedon, because all of these arrow towers are still active. And as I said, Mirkwood can't afford to lose as many unit models as the Orcs can in a similar assault. You see here some Black Uruks of the Mountains are coming forward. They could be supported by heavy goblin infantry, but perhaps more worrying, White Uruk Fearmongers. That phalanx could be enough to keep them at bay for quite some time. That elf there just took an arrow right to the back of the skull, but stayed standing. Still more units in reserve down here. So the question is, what did the Iron Rules do, I think? Because the assault is already well underway on the other side of the settlement. And I think they need to move in. If their allies are moving in, they need to as well. You need to present a united front. Because if Orange Phaedon and Starling are both allowed to be focused down by all of those ranged units of the Misty Mountains, Isengard simply doesn't have enough infantry to help DI's force win this battle for them, I think. So the Black Powder meme army might not be what was called for in the end.
Captured the enemy's walls.
Some of the walls have been captured at the very least, which I would assume actually would be the ones over by Orange Phaedon, which, if that is the case, some of those arrow towers will stop firing. That's a lot of reserves still for the Misty Mountains. Not a lot of it is of high quality, but it's a lot for them to try and cut their way through. You can see over here the Hiri were able to push their way toward the Snaga. However, they are going to pay for this quite dearly, because the Snow Trolls are here, and that is enough to break the Hiriak actually. Broken and fighting to the death. Which obviously fighting to the death essentially reduces your unit's combat abilities to the minimum. And they just die in one hit each, basically, and they're very unlikely to get any sort of kills. Really just there to get in the way. And they are going to be preventing the Snaga from actually sort of getting clear shots for the time being, at the very least, but you really want to be doing more with your heavy Elven spears if you can help it. And you can see here, actually, the Goblins perhaps feeling a little bit confident at recent events. Going to charge out with their Mountain Orc Berserkers and potentially get into the Thurney Tower. And that is a worthwhile endeavour, I think. The Thurney Tower, of course, are very, very lethal at range, as most Elven archers are. And they are going to force them to retreat. And obviously, the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, disposable units is basically what they're all about, so they can afford to throw some units under the bus.
We have nowhere to hide now.
I think hiding is part of their plan, really. You can see here the Delupeng Yamanduir as well, so Starling coming forward with basically everything he has. This has been a bit of a kamikaze attack, if I'm honest. The Delupeng Yamanduir are definitely the sort of unit you want to keep out of harm's way, and he threw them in here, and immediately, very unsurprisingly, all of the archers and skirmishers that the Misty Mountains had turned on them. The Goblin King's bodyguard over here, because over here, of course, Mirkwood is starting to push back against what was only a unit of heavy Goblin infantry and standard Goblin infantry. But with the support of the Goblin King bodyguard, this fight should turn around, actually, because these Mirkwood forces have been in melee for a little while at this point. Goblin King bodyguard is here, and a unit of White Uruk Fearmongers are coming across as well. So yeah, Starling's advances into the settlement have so far gone very poorly. The Snaga skirmish is also throwing into the side of his force over here. So that is going to be the story over there for the time being. Orange Phaedon, on the other hand, defeat seems certain, which surprises me. I can only assume that this is because of the still active arrow towers, because he does have, well, actually, I suppose the Black Uruks, the Mountains, have sort of won over here. The Maitha Ilaz Galan coming in with their javelins, which could be enough to turn this fight around, actually. Throwing into the side of that very large formation. But you can see here the Black Uruks immediately sort of peeling off from that engagement. They've taken a lot of damage, but at the very least they're going to stop the Maitha Ilaz Galan from firing. And this is going to allow the White Uruk Fearmongers, the heavy Goblin infantry, and these arrow towers to finish off what remains of the Megil Yeren that were pushing in. Over here, meanwhile, some slightly stronger units, the Hiri Alth, but once again there's just a sea of goblins in the way. Now over time, if not for the support of the arrow towers, I do believe Mirkwood would still win this fight. Purely because stuff like the Hiri Alth is so much stronger in melee than heavy goblins. But it's the range support that the Misty Mountains are giving to their units, both from the arrow towers and from units like the Snaga skirmishers and the heavy goblin crossbowmen. And this is why the elves are usually a lot more cautious when they assault settlement. But this was bold, which usually I'm in favour of, but here I think maybe just a little bit too foolhardy. The Megaliaran are actually routing and broken. I don't know what caused that. It must have been Snaga and crossbows, surely. They are routing though, and the heavy goblin infantry is holding their ground. So all of the goblin sort of melee forces are largely garbage, especially in comparison to Mirkwood. But all they're here for is to hold their ground and allow the ranged units to do their work. Very much the dwarfs in Warhammer philosophy. There goes Rules with another one of his black powder carts. Blowing up a gate this time, the south gate. I think the time has come for Rules to start moving in, and indeed he is. So you can see over here that it is just goblin infantry and heavy goblins, but unfortunately for Rules, all he has really to throw forward for the time being is Dunland and Clansmen. And they are spears, of course, which, you know, especially with those arrow towers and support, is going to allow the goblin infantry to get a rare victory. Although with all of these heavy goblins around, it's certainly not a one-on-one victory that they're achieving, but still, goblin infantry, victory seems certain. Not every day you see that. There's more Dunland and Clansmen coming in there. Rules, I think, seeing the necessity of starting to move a little bit more quickly, because the rest of the Mirkwood forces are not doing quite so well at this point in time. There are Blackback Berserkers coming across. If I were the Misty Mountains army at this point in time, I would be feeling pretty confident. There are some 30 tower up on the walls, trying to shoot down into these formations, but there are simply so many goblins that I don't think they can kill them off quickly enough. Here you can see Mountain Orc Berserkers fighting against the Thandrum Erin. But once again, it is the Misty Mountains ranged forces which are going to be having an effect in this fight. The Snaga skirmishers once again throwing their javelins into the backs of these units. As far as javelins go, they're certainly not the strongest, but it's still armour-piercing damage. Meanwhile, there's a lot of reorganisation going on over here, and you can see here that the Goblin King bodyguard is once again counter-attacking, and I mean at this point Engsvitz and Tundra's Fox, I can certainly see why they're counter-attacking, because Starling's army is in ruins. It was a very, very... I don't think he really thought that attack through, because he has been thoroughly repelled, and you know, while the town centre is right there and you can sort of assault it immediately if you're the army on this side, it's... when the town centre is right there, the enemy is always going to have units ready to defend that position more readily than other sections. So trying to rush the town centre is maybe not the wisest idea. If you're the army on this side of this particular settlement, you probably have to sort of come to terms with the fact that you're the one that's going to be the last one to commit your forces forward. You have to sort of let your allies do some of the heavy lifting on the other sides of the settlement first of all, to try and pull the defenders out of position before you move in. There are some Aradirith over here, but once again, the arrow towers doing the business. Meanwhile, over here you can see Orange Phaedon has got his Athalion Nanwaith in here, which is probably for the best, because at this point in time, this front line was surrounded after the Megaliaran collapsed. So both Starling and Orange Phaedon have been pretty effectively dealt with by the Misty Mountains so far, but there is still a long way to go in this fight, and it's very rare that, well, it's rarer than not that we see the team of 3 beat the team of 4 in a siege like this, especially when what they've got to work with in melee are just basic goblins. I think this was the way in. The Isengard are sort of carving for themselves, I think, because they realise they desperately need to help Orange Phaedon if he is to survive any longer in this battle. There goes another black powder cart, so we're seeing all sorts of explosions all across the field. There are the champions of the White Hand, which if they start marauding around the settlement, it could be pretty nasty. I can only apologise for the frames every time these... oh my. That is a lot of crispy Snaga and goblins that are on the floor. And I can only assume that is because the black powder cart was right here, so that's a lot of kills that they just got from the black powder, which Rules is going to need a lot more of that if they are to continue to stand a chance in this battle. Meanwhile, DI over here is starting to come down and fight on the streets. You can see over here the heavy goblin spears again. Victory is a distinct possibility, and once again, this is only because of the range support they're getting. Snaga skirmishers are here. The arrow towers are, well, to be fair, there's only one arrow tower in the nearby vicinity that's actually firing. But again, it's the javelins, because in pure melee, heavy goblin halberds and spears would be absolutely dumpstered by Hiri Alf and Megil Erin. but that is not the case here. Meanwhile, we've got some javelins over here. I believe DI did tell me about this. He was trying to get his javelins to target something and they just refused to shoot. And I would assume this is it.
The enemy are badly bloodied.
Because the Snaga
They have lost half their men.
are showing no mercy themselves. So instead he's just going to engage them in melee with some 30 tower. And obviously Snaga are terrible in melee. Snaga skirmishers even more so. So the 30 tower are going to have very limited problems cutting and carving their way through here, even if there are more goblins on standby to move in. The black powder cart is once again being remounted, so I assume the black powder cart has just got as many charges as, well, as long as the crew stays alive, but the crew are on ground zero every time it goes off, so you lose more and more for each detonation you instigate. Meanwhile, Athalion Nanwaith from Starling are moving in. Very little remains of his army, but he should be able to at the very least hold this force of goblins and Snaga at bay for some time. But over here you can see some Thandrum Yeren also pushing back against the Mountain Hawk Berserkers. So in this corner of the settlement, all of a sudden, things not looking quite so bad. The charges from the Champions to White Hand undoubtedly proving to be a big part of why they were able to turn things around over here, because that was very, very quick. There's also some Athalion Nanwaith from Phaedon, who is going to move into the Goblin King bodyguard. The heavy Goblin crossbows are over here, however. And I can only assume that they will attempt to target the Champions of the White Hand. The Maitha Ilazgalen are also over here, so things starting to turn a bit of a corner perhaps for the attackers. Mirkwood starting to claw their way back into this fight. Although over here, the White Uruk Fearmongers doing very well for themselves. But Starling with his Delupeng Yamandouya, who butchered in the initial phases of this battle, coming back to shoot right down the line of the White Uruk Fearmongers. There goes another detonation from the Black Powder Cart. All of these Snaga skirmishers, and of course the more and more melee forces that the Misty Mountains lose, the less they're going to have to defend their skirmishers with, and if that does end up being the case, that's where they could end up losing this battle still, because the Misty Mountains ranged forces in melee, and needless to say, are terrible. Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen are not going to win you the battle in melee. Here comes a big force of Black Uruks of the Mountains. Well, there are some Delupeng Yamandouya here from Orange Phaedon, but they are very spread out, I think. The Arguate Nanwaith are up on the walls as well. But a bit of a counter-attack coming from Eclipse 2500 here, trying to chase down these javelins. There's crossbow bolts, there's javelins.
Without their general, they may lose heart and flee.
Speaking of which, that was Thranduil, and I believe, yep, that was Orange Phaedon's general. So the Black Uruks of the Mountains doing their people proud, managing to cut down one of the 3 Thranduils on the battlefield today. Crossbow bolts coming in, trying to kill off the Delupeng, which again, very understandable. Their damage potential is ludicrously high. The Black Uruks of the Mountains showing their stuff in melee. They are only up against spears. They may be Elven spears, but even so, a two-handed sword unit like this is still going to be able to do pretty well, even against Elven units of this type. So the Black Uruks, once again, proving themselves to be a rare gem in the Misty Mountains roster. Meanwhile, you can see how badly the Heavy Goblin Halberds have just been beaten into the dirt by the Athalion Nanwaith from Starling over here. A very, very poor performance from the Halberds, of course. There are some Mountain Hawk Berserkers coming across as well. Still a few Isengard units, including some Snaga. But here come Mirkwood once again. So again, they're really bringing it back here. Because the initial phases, Starling's very ill-fated assault on the town centre was had me worrying for their continued existence in this fight, but I feel as though Mirkwood have turned the corner and they have made this a very even contest once again. You can see here that there is Thranduil on the front line, fighting against these filthy goblins. There are some Mountain Hawk Berserkers over there as well, but I think it's fairly safe to say that DI has managed to sort of carve out this section of the settlement for his forces. There are some Heavy Goblin Halberds and some Mountain Hawk Berserkers coming over here again, but both of these units have got to focus around AP. Another detonation from the Black Powder Cart. And is this where they... Yep, this was it. So another hole has been made in the settlement. At this point there are so many ways in to choose from. Here comes the Champions to White Hand, which could yet be the match winner. If Misty Mountains don't have anything to answer them in the late game, it's going to be bad for them. Here come the Nazkai. And here comes what Rules does have for an infantry force. The Berserkers and the Nazkai are coming in. And unfortunately for them, the Snaga skirmishers are about to be engaged in melee by the Nazkai. I'm surprised they're walking, actually. A nice charge there. Of course, the Snaga are going to break under a charge from the Champions of the White Hand. I'd be quite surprised if they didn't break under a charge from the Nazkai as well, a rear charge as well, and they're being hit by a Thalioni Nanwaith. They didn't actually. How about that? Meanwhile, Champions of the White Hand continuing to put pressure on this middle road down here.
Our ally lies dead, slain by the enemy. We must help his men avenge him.
There goes the Isengard general there. Wild. He was the one that got
Only
caught.
half our force remains.
That's always annoying when that happens, when your general is the one that dies as part of a little expedition. Meanwhile, here comes Engsfit's catapult. There's also some heavy goblin crossbowmen up here. I do worry for the Misty Mountains and how much infantry they have left in reserve, because I feel as though what they have left is primarily ranged units at this point. You can tell things are getting desperate when Snaga skirmishers are the ones that are resolutely holding the line. It's a real mismatch of units here on the front line for Mirkwood. They've got Hiri out, they've got some Megali Errant, some 30 Tower. I can barely hear myself talk over the sound of the artillery thundering around the battlefield. Here are the Mountain Orc Berserkers, but again, defeat seems certain. Not really the sort of fight they're particularly good in, especially seeing as they have very little in terms of armour and skill.
The enemy general abandoned it.
Interesting. So one of the Goblin generals is gone. The Delupeng, Yam and Dwyer are here, shooting into this section of the field over yonder. Arguaiti Nanwaith are firing at the moon by the looks of things. There is Eclipse's general running for the hills. He will go back to the town centre if he is able. Here we have some Arguaiti Nanwaith as well, who have their swords out at this point in time. And indeed, a couple of them are deciding to slowly hack and slash their way through some Snaga. Heavy Goblin Crossmen loitering as well. Cave Troll Drummers. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know if the Misty Mountains have got it. I mean, we are into the final 10,000 frames, so just having a look. And yeah, you can see the Misty Mountains are behind in this battle at this point. I imagine they were ahead when Starling's army started to crumble, but over time, the less and less ammunition and range support the Misty Mountains have been able to use, the more and more that the elves have come back into it with their melee. Heavy Goblin Crossmen trying to shoot. And they are shooting at this blob over here. I think they're going after the Maitha Ilasgalan. But yeah, I mean, Heavy Goblin Archers now being forced to try and hold the line. It's just a sign of how desperate things might be getting here for the Misty Mountains. Although they are unlikely to break. At least break quite so easily with the Cave Troll Drummers in close proximity. The Cave Troll Drummers themselves might prove to be a slightly tougher unit to try and hack and slash their way through for the elves. Still some Heavy Goblin crossbows as well, although I think they're just sort of shooting upwards. It's not a particularly good angle for them to be firing at. Meanwhile, some Snaga skirmishers are firing. There's Heavy Goblin spears who are trying to retreat as they are getting absolutely torn to shreds by the Lurt's hunting pack. That body piercing though. When it comes to sieges, rangers are definitely the potentially the strongest units. There goes Starling's general. Shanked by Heavy Goblin archers of all things, which I think this is over here. That was Starling's general, so yeah, it must have been. And there isn't much left of the forces over here either. Unfortunate, so once again, unlucky to lose their general in such a way. I don't think it'll matter too much though. The Elven morale is good enough to sort of hold themselves together without having to worry about that too much. Here comes Rules and his Snaga, Champions of the White Hand, getting ready to move forwards as well. One of the Champions of the White Hand is sort of stuck in amongst all of this nonsense here. He may very well be able to escape, however, because most of it is just archers, so they're not really going to be able to do much in the way of damage to him. That's a lot of javelins coming in as well into this big old blob. Urukai crossbows also moving in, so yeah, Rules, despite not having much in the way of infantry, still has the units here to be very, very important here in the late game. I feel as though he may actually be the one to try and drag his team over the line. There are still Blackback Berserkers over here, because I feel as though DI still has a decent number of troops left as well. Phaedon and Starling's armies are both with fairly handily cut down to size at this point. DI, however, still does have a fair amount of infantry left with which to support. That Isengard Ballista doing more damage to the Misty Mountains forces that remain. More heavy goblin crossbows doing some damage over here. It's still close. I mean, if DI takes too much in the way of damage from the still remaining Misty Mountains ranged forces, then Rules is going to be fairly isolated. There's some Snaga up on the walls. You can barely see them. They're barely taller than the pile of corpses that has formed here. The 30 tower also there. The Goblin Archers' victory seems certain. Thandram and Erin are getting into melee now with the heavy goblin crossbows. That's really, really important to try and stop them from firing. Nathan Ilazgalan doing the same. National Berserker's not really sure what way to go in. What have we got over here? Some Athalioni and Anwaith from Starling still moving. The Snaga Skirmish is getting into position. Also the Aradirith Amon Lank from Starling, but they're hideously outnumbered. The Goblins should finally be able to finish them off should they so choose. And then there's also the Uruk-hai crossbows as well. The Isengard Ballista is in melee with something. That's surprising. It must be some sort of goblins that were just sort of left behind over here. There's another fight going on over here still. A whole bunch of heavy goblin spears and blackback berserkers from Enxfirts. Could they be trying to finish off the Arguay in Anwaith? That was where Starling's general was, wasn't it? So yeah, that must have been it. My bad. More goblins, however, doing the business. Snaga skirmishers over here, throwing their jabbies in. Victory seems certain. They can move in over here to try and kill off the crossbow man, which is bold. The Lurtz hunting pack are here as well. I mean, certainly the blackback berserkers are significantly stronger in melee than the crossbows and than the Lurtz hunting pack. Oh no, they shouldn't have. Were they worried about being surrounded? I suppose they were, but now they're going to expose their backs to a straight shot from the Uruk-hai crossbowman. Some goblin archers over here trying to take on the Lurtz hunting pack, which is brave, if somewhat foolish. Goblin King bodyguard moving forward now as well, trying to finish off these Athalioni and Anwaith once and for all, who are still standing unbelievably. Rules has got some crossbows and some Snaga. The crossbow Snaga combination is now certainly being utilised in favour of the attackers. The Eye continuing to try and push forward, and why not? I mean, there's not really much left in the way. There is a single unit of Goblin King bodyguard. If he's able to get his Delupang into a good position to shoot, provided they still have ammunition. I mean, there are White Uruk fearmongers back here, I suppose, but still, not a lot left. DI can put some pressure on the town centre here. Heavy Goblin Archers moving back, Cave Trolls, armed with their tree trunks and the like. Here comes the Champions of the White Hand, though. Still a potentially very, very key unit. I still feel as though Reshade, I need to change a few things about Reshade. I feel as though the brightness, I do get frame drops from using it. I know that it does look nicer, but the smoothness and sort of the slight jumpiness when you zoom in does bother me quite a lot. So I think that I might actually go back to not using it at all, or at least using a very minor enhancement version of it. Meanwhile, Goblin King bodyguard sort of going up against the Isengard Snaga, setting themselves apart by their colour scheme. Naturally, those Snaga skirmishers not really going to be a match for Goblin King bodyguard, but I think once again we're going to see a bit of a retreat. The Champions of the White Hand once again pulling back in. It's crazy at this point in time. DI's army is looking a little bit haggard at this point, though. It doesn't have too much left to give, I don't think. The Goblin Archers are over here fighting something. They are fighting nothing, actually. They just finished fighting something, I think. It says Bouncer Forces is evenly matched, but yeah, there's nothing there. I mean, it must have been those three here out. So they're now going to be freed up to try and attack the rear of DI's army. Even if they all just die, they can at least get in the way a little bit. Goblin King bodyguard forming up. Some heavy goblin crossbows over there as well. There's still a lot of goblins running around. Certainly in terms of quality. Champions of the White Hand have taken yet more damage though. Trying to assassinate this general perhaps, and they may very well be able to accomplish that here. As we ride with the champions of the White Hand. They'll surely be able to break those heavy goblin crossbows at this point. The Cave Troll Drummers bravely charging in, but unfortunately for them it's up against Argway Nanway, Uruk-hai Berserkers and Nazkai, I think. So they will very quickly be put to the sword, unfortunately for them. Yeah, I feel as though the individual quality at this point that the attackers have is going to be just too much for the goblins to withstand. Still a fair few goblins throughout the settlement, but it's not going to be sufficient, I don't think. Meanwhile,
Good tidings.
yeah, there goes the general.
Lies dead.
Run through. Still some cave trolls over here. Uruk-hai crossbows. Some more Snaga skirmishers from rules. The Lurtz hunting pack are over here. The cave troll drummers being used offensively. They are still trolls, so they're not exactly the easiest things to deal with, but a unit like the Lurtz hunting pack should be just fine. A lot of the buildings are on fire. Should Mirkwood be successful in capturing this settlement, they'll have a little bit of work to bring it back up into shape. Future RPs in 0.97, I imagine, will be able to use WK's sort of revamped settlement, so we'll be able to see like Elven towns and cities and fortresses and Dwarven equivalents as well, which I'm looking forward to. Meanwhile, more damage being taken at range. I'm actually a little bit surprised that the goblins have decided to take this tactic, sort of pulling back and allowing the elves to use what ranged units they have left. Crossbows are over here as well. Halfway over here, the champions of the White Hand are depleted at this point, but they've certainly done their job. They've been a big factor in the battle ever since they got into the settlement, running around, charging into units, doing damage, causing units to break. Chaos all around. What they're good at. A lot of Isengard forces left. I mean, Isengard have probably got the healthiest army of all the attackers that are left, so surely that means the settlement should go to them. It's not as if the elves would be able to argue in the aftermath of the battle after all. Delupeng, Yam and Luia doing some more skirmishing. The goblins are just sort of sat there taking it at this point, and I feel as though the writing is on the wall for the gobos. Speaking of which, there are some goblin archers trying to take on some Thantrum Yeren. Trying being the operative word, of course. They do have the support of the towers, I suppose, but that's not going to be enough. Not for goblin archers. A lot of goblins still in sort of loose formation all throughout. Fernie Tower doing their best as well. There goes the final Cave Troll Drummer, brought down by a horde of Snaga. I'm surprised actually that the attackers have not already started to move in. I mean, I suppose they have. Probing with some Snaga. Snaga versus Heavy Goblin Archers. The ultimate duel. But yeah, this is certainly going to be going in favour of the attacks. I feel they've got nothing that can now deal with Nazkai or Uruk-hai Berserkers or Lurtz hunting back in melee. They may very well have a little something back here, do they? Well, I mean, 2 units of Blackback Berserkers. Actually, that's White Uruk Fearmongers as well. Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen being butchered by the Argway Nanway. I mean, it's not going to be easy, I suppose, but there's a fair amount of these Heavy Goblin Spears as well. There's some Heavy Goblin Crossbows up on the wall. I mean, if they can get some good shots here, that could be all the Goblins need to win this. Yeah, I didn't see those Blackback Berserkers. That changes things a little bit, I think. Because, I mean, DI doesn't really have much. Uruk-hai crossbows getting into position. I mean, the Uruk-hai have crossbows of their own, which is probably the issue here. And the Misty Mountains have to fight for this section of the city. They cannot simply hide behind the corner, because if they lose the town centre, the match is over. Goblin King Bodyguard being focused. I mean, if I were the Misty Mountains, I'd charge in. You no longer have the advantage at range. You need to try and get into melee and hope that your Blackback Berserkers can do the business. If you just sit back, all of your manpower is going to be bled by the crossbows. So yeah, this is a pretty criminal mistake, I think. Even if it's unlikely that you would win, even with the Blackback Berserkers, you still need to make a fist of it and get in there. Just sort of standing there and hoping that they run out of ammunition is never really going to pan out for you. That's desperation tactics more than anything else. Snaga coming in, more bolts flying in as well. These units are just dying, slowly but surely. Heavy Goblin crossbows, I think, are actually targeting these Snaga units, perhaps trying to break them. Which they may very well be able to do, actually. They're already wavering. Some Misty Mountains Snaga just next to them. See the difference here? The Isengard Snaga look like sort of swamp men. Snaga over here, and again you can see that they're just committing forward individual units. Not the right way to do things, in my opinion. Just sort of throwing this unit of White Uruk Fearmongers under the bus. Here comes the Blackback Berserkers now. And they're admitting defeat. Yeah, I feel as though they honestly could have actually made a bit more of a fight of it here at the end if they had decided to move as one. They had the catapult as well. So in the end, perhaps a bit of a disappointing ending, really, on behalf of the defenders. But the attackers did very well. I mean, early on, Starling's Banzai charge into the wall was maybe not the most well thought out thing. Orange Phaedon had to try and follow him in and suffered similar casualties, but in the end it didn't matter. They managed to sort of bring it back, they managed to conserve their elites and bring them forward in support of both DI and rules. The Black Powder Cart Meme army was a success, I think. Knocking several holes in the wall, doing the business. There is the Isengard Ballista as well. I think going for the enemy catapult. Uruk-hai Berserkers coming forward. A single unit of Blackback Berserkers was never going to be enough. They needed both of them with the full support of the rest of their infantry as well. But unfortunately for them, they are just going to be cut down by the superior numbers. All of these Snaga, a few elves, and of course the Uruk-hai Berserkers with that armour upgrade, making them look exactly the same as the Nazkai, which is very confusing. Uruk-hai crossbows continuing to go in. I'm glad we got to see the Black Powder Carts in action. They're a very niche unit indeed. They're in the Agwe Inanwe. The rotting meat is being flung. Just leaving it all out on the line here. Angswitz is here. I mean, the Misty Mountains don't... I suppose they were trying to defend against this one unit of Agwe Inanwe, but I mean, really, this unit of spears was needed on the front line. Angswitz is Blackback. Yeah, Angswitz is the one who had all of these units just in reserve, including his Goblin King bodyguard. He needed to move forward. He needed to be the one to sort of move forward and not just let his allies suicide into their lines. Because sort of being too conservative like this is ultimately what's going to cost them the game.
Our allies have fled the field like cowards.
I say that. I mean, they have at least managed to kill off a few armies worth of units. But I feel as though...
command of the castle.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way that he would have been able to recapture the town centre. Not with the ballista there, not with the rangers, not with the crossbows, not with the well, 2 units of crossbows getting very nice crossfire as well. So that is going to be the end. Victory for the attackers, but only just, as the announcer says, only by a sword's edge.
Defeated on the field, but fate has been kind and delivered us victory.
Interesting. You know, I think both teams had their good moments. Both teams had their bad moments as well. DI getting the most kills, Rules following him in. I do feel as though Rules and DI were why the attackers won this battle ultimately, because Starling was very, very strange assaults on the walls. I mean, Orange Phaedon got the least amount of kills, but Starling was definitely... I'm all for being aggressive, but that seemed a bit overly aggressive, to be fair. Angswitz getting the most kills among the Misty Mountains as well, but you can only expect so much when you're going up against Elven units when you're playing as the Misty Mountains. So having a look at DI's army, the Hiri-Alth doing a good amount of damage. Hiri-Alth, generally speaking, actually, the MVPs, as you know, Thurney Tower, getting over 400 kills. So yeah, goes to show the power of even basic Elven archers. Having a look at Starling, his army did well for itself in several places. The Delupen getting 580 kills, which, you know, early on he could have lost them if he wasn't careful. So he managed to salvage them, and in the end he managed to get some decent amount of damage done. It's no surprise, I think, that the units he was able to save from his initial sort of attack onto the walls were the ones that ended up doing well. So his elites, which he didn't commit initially, and we saw them later in the battle, they were able to get more kills, whereas the units he sent in immediately, maybe not so good. I mean, the unit of Hiri-Alth only getting 37 against the Misty Mountains is not great. And then Orange Phaedon, you know, he suffered pretty much the same sort of fate, only he had less to play with later on. So understandably he had less kills, but the Megal Yaren doing well, and that goes to show their efficiency against sort of basic units of goblins like this. So big thank you to Starling for sending this one to me. Big thank you to Rules for telling him to send this one to me. Obviously, the RP battles are always an interesting one because this is the first time I think I've seen sort of an alliance form between two of the factions. But for the most part, it is obviously factions, sort of unified factions, where you have to sort of make up for their strengths and weaknesses. And this time I do feel as though we did see both the strength and the weakness of being the elves on the attack early on. It's very clear that the lack of numbers can have a detrimental impact, especially if you're overly aggressive. You know, your army can be sort of bottled up and finished off very, very quickly because of your lack of manpower. But as the battle wore on, we saw the defense, the skill of Mirkwood in melee, and how much better than they are than the goblins at doing that sort of thing. Obviously, Isengard played a big part in that as well, but you know, that was the two sides of the coin. And as far as the defenders goes, initially, their very heavy focus on ranged units certainly helped them sort of deal with Starling and Orange Feyardon's assault. But as the battle wore on, much like the fight on the Iron Hills, when their units started running out of ammunition, they found themselves only really being able to commit stuff like Snaga skirmishes and heavy goblin crossbowmen to the front line, which is woefully ineffective against units like Hiri Youth, which was, you know, a lot of what they were facing. So yeah. Big thank you to the players that sent this one to me. Next, I'm not quite so sure. I'll have to go through my my list to see what I can post up next. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.